the verses so they were in a different order, so that you thought maybe he was playing something about the word order and the paragraph order. No, it was just to make you think he was doing something, but he was changing the paragraph orders to help him make this other argument where the geographical location of where his experience was it mattered, that it doesn't fall within the barrier of Matthew 24, which, by the way, I think is a very obvious, not what Jesus intended. I'm going to come back universally, but what the sign of it will be, somebody's only going to be coming in Jerusalem who's going to violate the warning I'm giving you. Like, it could be nowhere else. It couldn't be in the United States or wherever that these events could have occurred. So anyway, let's read what Smith's intent in retranslating Matthew 24. All right, here's my intro to it. But Joseph Smith knew Matthew 24 was a thorn in his side, so he offered his own translation of Matthew's chapter 24 in a way which both erased and deflected the clear-cut criteria which would invalidate Smith's first encounter as a private wilderness sighting, as I'll explain below. See the official LDS explanation in Joseph Smith, Matthew. So if you go to that link I just showed you, it will give you this explanation. The Jesus with whom Joseph Smith was in touch specifically directed Matthew 24 to be changed. This is recorded in the official companion book of the Book of Mormon, known as the Doctrine and Covenants, is what it says. Prior to his crucifixion and resurrection, the Lord Jesus answered his disciples' questions about his glorious second coming. See Matthew 24, 3, 25, 26. So you see, Mormonism has to and does refer to the Christian Bible that you and I read. And it did that initially, for sure, and they were treating it as authentic. So by doing that, they now had the problem. What if they've included something that is going to destroy the validity of Joseph Smith's experience in Palmyra, New York, in his backyard? Well, we can't have that, can we? So we've got to do something about this. See also Luke 21, 7, verse 36. So Luke has a parallel to it, very similar. On 7th of March, 1831, the Lord, meaning Jesus, revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith portions of what he told his disciples. See, I guess this is Doctrine and Covenants 45, 16 to 75. And that revelation, speaking to the prophet Joseph Smith, he, the Lord Jesus, said, "And now, behold, I say unto you, it shall not be given unto you to know any further concerning this chapter of Matthew 24, until the New Testament be translated. In it, the Joseph Smith translation, all these things shall be made known. Wherefore I give unto you that you may now translate it, the New Testament, that ye may be prepared for the things to come. For verily I say unto you, the great things await you." And it gives a citation to Doctrines and Covenants. And then it says this. So that's the end of it. So this appears to me what is his Jesus even saying, you won't have to do this translation of Matthew 24 just yet. And then he says, but now you will translate the New Testament, starting with that. That seems to be what seems to be saying. I don't understand the sentences, but that's not here or there. But the point is, this is the explanation. And then it says this. This is the Mormon comment on these words. The prophet Joseph Smith made more changes to Matthew 24 than to any other chapter in the New Testament. See Joseph Smith, Matthew, LDS.org. Okay? So that's all we know why it was done. He was told to do it by Jesus Christ. Right? There's something wrong in Matthew 24. You need to fix it. All right. These Mormon scholar comments that I read that were telling me, hey, Pauline Christians won't ever expose this problem about Joseph Smith, so we really don't have to worry about it. But the Mormon scholar comments were to explain why Joseph Smith had to retranslate under angel guidance Matthew 24. So that's what we're going to look at today a little bit here. So here's the actual passage when you look at Matthew 24. Jesus foretells the impending destruction of Jerusalem. Now that's key. See how even the headings, the way it's officially applicable, are going to localize Jerusalem as the place where all these events could happen, and if they happen anywhere else, they don't come within the contours of Matthew 24. You can just ignore them if it's not happening at Jerusalem. If there's no Jesus appearing at Jerusalem saying, "I'm Jesus," it doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. So Palmyra, New York is off the table. Don't even think about it. Now, I can go through all this with you, but I'm just going to show you now what is Joseph Smith's personal story of the appearance of Jesus to himself. How did he start? What was the first thing? Just like the experience of Paul on the road to Damascus, there's the same type thing that's going to be said here in the summary of Joseph Smith's experience with his Jesus. Okay, and this is in the official Pearl of Great Price. Okay, so we're going to read this. It's an excerpt. So, in accordance with this, that's Joseph Smith, my determination to ask of God, I retired to the woods, a wilderness. See, so when he wrote this, and can't take it back years later, he's already put his foot in it, and he didn't know Matthew 24 would be talking about a wilderness. I retired to the woods to make the attempt. It was on the morning of a beautiful, clear day early in the spring of 1820. Okay. I kneeled down and began to offer up the desires of my heart to God. I saw a pillar of light, exactly like who? Paul. Exactly over my head. When the light rested upon me, I saw two personages whose brightness and glory defy all description. One of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other, This is my beloved Son, hear him. I asked the personages who stood above me in the light, which of all the sex was right, for at this time it had never entered into my heart that all were wrong. I just want to pause here. Is he saying he saw this in his brain, in a dream, in a vision? By the way, if you go look at the Law and Prophets, you'll see many of the prophets say, in a vision or in a dream, I saw this or heard this. See, so if you're talking this way, you're talking about something that's extra mental, outside of your own brain. You're experiencing this, and so others can experience it with you if they were present. So Paul has that, where men are with him and they can see the light, they can hear the voice, and so it's not in Paul's head, it's neither in Joseph Smith's head. So that's the problem, the way it was written. He wasn't in my bed, I wasn't laying it down asleep, I'm having a vision. No, I was outside in the woods, in the wilderness, and then these two personages come down. One speaks to the other as the other is the Son. This is my beloved Son. I asked the personages who stood above me in the light, which of all the sex was right? For at this time it had never entered into my heart that all were wrong, in which I should join. I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. I soon found, however, that my telling the story had excited a great deal of prejudice against me among professors or believers of religion, and was the cause of a great persecution, which continued to increase. And though I was an obscure boy, only about 14 and 15 years of age. So this happened when he was a minor. That's okay. Jeremiah was a minor when he was called, right? Yet men of high standing would take notice sufficient to excite the public mind against me and create a bitter persecution. And this was common among all the sects, all united to persecute me. Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith, History, 1:5-8, or verses 5 to 8, verses 14 to 19, and verse 22. Okay? So clearly, this is almost identical to Paul's experience, except there were not men. Men were with Paul, they heard the voice, and they saw the light. So it was clearly an extra mental experience of Paul. And here it's obviously also an extra mental experience. It's something he's seeing out in the woods, not in his bed. Now, I want to compare this to the actual Matthew 24. What is it warning about? Jesus in Matthew 24, verse 3, has been asked just before this, what will be the sign of your return? Okay. Then the very first thing Jesus warns about before anything else is discussed, before he talks about tribulations, Jerusalem, or any of these other events, he says one thing to look out for. So it's the immediate danger to the church when he ascends. He says this, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus says the very first thing he says, right? This is 3. Verse 5, for many shall come in my name saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. That's the very first thing he starts with. Nothing. It's not later. It's not when it's in Jerusalem. He's talking about immediately. This could happen next week, next month. It could be any time. You don't know. And Paul's experience in Acts 9 is 3 years after the ascension of Jesus to heaven. So Paul fits exactly within this immediate warning of the most important danger you face now, Christians, apostles, is somebody's going to claim they met me and say the person talking to them said, I am Christ, I am Jesus. They're going to use my name. They're going to deceive many. And then Jesus says later in the passage, then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not, for there shall rise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders. So miracle signs and wonders are what? Meaningless, Jesus says. This is in line with Deuteronomy 13, 1-10. False prophets who come with signs and wonders, God says you must reject them when they violate or teach against my law. Okay, so that, or give a different version of God than you've ever known before. Okay, that's in Deuteronomy 13, 1-10. It's called the law of apostates. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. This is so good that even a person who's truly following Christ could maybe even that kind of person could be deceived. It would be so powerful, this message. Behold, I have told you before. Verse 26, wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth, behold, he is in the secret chambers, or in the inner rooms is a better translation. So behold, he is in the desert. He's in a wilderness place is another good translation. Go not forth. Do not follow this person. Behold, he is in the inner rooms, like a private room, a private barrack. Believe it not. Paul had both of these events, both one in the wilderness. The road outside Damascus is considered a wilderness. Anything outside of a city is called city. Anything outside the city in those days was called wilderness. So if you're taking a road, there's no Motel 6 outside of a city. So you're in the wilderness before you get into the city, just so you know how it works. And then Paul in Acts 23:11 says, hey, Jesus came down from heaven to me personally in my barracks and stood beside me to strengthen me. Wow. This Jesus that he's having is having a physical appearance on earth multiple times in both a wilderness and a desert and a private room. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's too perfect. Jesus gave a prophecy that's so on point that means he's trying to get through to us, but we're so dense. We don't listen. Verse 27, for as the lightning comes out of the east, and it's plural, east, and I'll tell you why that's important, and shines even unto the west, and that's plural wests. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So what Jesus is saying is, when I come back, I'm going to be seen from every point east, every point west at the same time. Somehow, the miraculous way that God works, Jesus' return will be visually available to everyone when you look up from any point east and west on the earth. So it's a universal return. Everyone will see me. It's a major event of all time. It could not be hidden. It could be not done in a small little city. It had to be done universally. So the exclusion of Paul from the Bible is mandatory, because his Jesus cannot be our Jesus. His Jesus appears to him in a private room in Acts 23:11, and then in the account in Acts 9, and again in 23, I think it is, in 26. His Jesus never appears universally. It's just seen by two men, heard by two men, or a couple of men with him, heard by them. They see the light. They don't understand the Hebrew that Jesus is speaking, but Paul speaks Hebrew and he can understand it. So we have a complete, clear claim or proof from our Lord Jesus that what this person is happening, both Paul and Joseph Smith, have to be, at least at minimum, demonic spirits pretending to be Jesus. And Paul says he doesn't even know who Jesus was. When he shows up, he says, who are you, sir? Let's take a look at Acts 9, verse 5. And Paul said, who are you? So he sees this person who's going to respond. He's going to say, I am Jesus. Paul doesn't know it's Jesus. So the word Lord made you and I think, oh, he recognizes him as Jesus. But the word Lord is an acronym from maybe Old English. You could do it because it's a substitute word for the word sir. So who are you, sir? A term of politeness. So in those days, if you watched Downton Abbey, you would address anyone who you met in the first instance, and you wanted to ascribe a humble nature to yourself and show admiration for the person you met. You'd say, who are you, Lord? In that sense of someone superior to yourself, but that's all. But whoever this is, Paul does not recognize who it is. He doesn't know if it's Jesus or not. That means he didn't know who Jesus was on earth when he was walking the earth and preaching. He never saw him, because he would have recognized him here, right? So that means he didn't meet Jesus. He couldn't prove from his own memory that this was Jesus. He was simply taking the word for it from this spirit or this person. This person is appearing apparently physically with a beam of light. Let's read a little further. Then Jesus, the Lord, said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads, a verse out of a pagan play called the Bacchae by Euripides, but I'm going to pause on that. And then he says this. So he, trembling and astonished, that's Paul. Now, Paul is giving this account to Luke, because Luke tells you, I wasn't with him in any of these things. These are eyewitnesses I'm relying upon. He tells Theophilus, beginning in Luke 1, verse 1-3. And he says, I'm relying upon witnesses to tell me what happened. So he's an historian. He's not claiming to be an inspired writer, just so you know, as to Book of Acts for sure. This is just history. So he, Paul, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, Kyrios, sir, what do you want me to do? He's still talking to him as a sir, not as his Lord, master. He isn't converted to anything. That's the other thing. This is why using mistranslations deceive you. He didn't mean Lord here. He didn't mean Lord here. He's talking to someone he doesn't know, being respectful and calling him sir. Who are you, sir? And Mr. Mounsey has one of the meanings of the word Kyrios is sir, a term of respect. to someone you don't know. Okay. Then the Lord said to him, arise. So the master said to him, arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Now, that's it. That's the entire call of Paul. It ends right there. Now, you're going to see embellishments by Paul that adds all kinds of stuff later, but they're not here. His Jesus says virtually nothing. I just want you to keep that in mind. And the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. So did this experience of Paul only exist in his mind as a vision? No. The men with him could do what? They heard the voice, but they saw no one. They didn't see anyone. Why? And if you listen carefully, Luke is describing, or Paul is being describing to Luke, this is a big, bright light, and by focusing in on it himself, he blinded himself by looking into the strong light. It was a blinding light. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one. But they led him by the hand and brought him to Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. That's it. So you can compare this account with this account from Joseph Smith, and it has all the same parallels. Both are in a wilderness place outside of a city in Paul's day of Damascus, outside of the city where Joseph Smith lived. Both of them had in bright light come down physically. Jesus appears to them. It's not in his brain. Neither one are having visions. Each of them are experiencing a real event in real time. That's why Paul has a physical blindness happen to his eyes, right? So such a bright light. Other men hear the voice in Paul's case. Joseph Smith is alone, but he's claiming this is just like any other experience that people like Paul had, which Jesus and Yahweh come down to speak with Joseph Smith. And then he gets a special message, and basically he's a young person, and he's told that all Christian religions are false or wrong. Something's wrong with all of them. Now, I want to also show you that Paul claims that his Jesus came physically to him, just so you can see why Pauline Christians are embarrassed to ever have to try to attack Joseph Smith on the real strongest grounds against him, which is he violates Matthew 24, because look what happens to Paul. Paul claims in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 5 to 8, that Jesus physically appeared to him just like he did to all the other people before him. And Jesus, was seen by Cephas, that's Peter, then by the 12, and that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present. Now, by the way, notice who is excluding himself from the 12. He isn't even an apostle. He isn't even called by Jesus yet, okay? He hasn't even had his experience yet, and he's calling all the others the 12. Just keep that in mind. He knows he's not part of the 12. And that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present, but some have fallen asleep. After that, he was seen by James, that's the brother of Jesus, then by all the apostles. Then, last of all, he was seen by me also. So does he include himself in the original apostles? No. Does he include himself within the 12? No. So right there, unwittingly, Paul invalidates himself as an apostle of Jesus Christ, because he can't be. There's no more than 12. The New Jerusalem is what? Founded on 12 foundation stones, who are whom? The 12 apostles, not a 13th, 12 apostles. And Paul excluded himself from that circle of 12, which were the original 11. Judas fell away. And then in Acts 1, Jesus replaces Judas with Matthias. And then Jesus sends and goes away. That's how that all gets resolved. And here's a second reason why our Pauline scholars are reluctant, extremely reluctant, and would never argue Matthew 24 against Joseph Smith. Listen to this, Acts 23:11. The following night, the Lord Jesus stood by him and said, now this again is Paul. Luke is not in the room, in the prison cell with Paul. So he's alone by himself. Luke is recording what Paul tells him. So the following night, the Lord Jesus stood by him and said, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so must you also testify in Rome. Notice testimony is not the same as being an apostle. Apostle is someone who carries a message. Someone who carries a message is an apostle, apostolos. That's what it means in Greek, which is a loan word, by the way, into Hebrew as well, because remember, the Greek country controlled and ruled over Judea for hundreds of years until the Romans replaced them in the 90 BC period. Anyway, so testimony is different. I saw the risen Christ. I've seen his body resurrected, his blood. And so he tells you that's what happened in 1 Corinthians 15. He's now a witness to the resurrection of Jesus. That's what his Jesus is telling him here. Notice I believe God restricted, and I don't believe this is the real Jesus. I'm being honest with you. It can't be. But God restricted this person, whoever this phony Jesus is, to not say anything that would go too far to give an authority to Paul of being an apostle of Jesus Christ, because being a witness to the resurrection doesn't make you an apostle. There are many people who saw the resurrected Christ. If 500 people saw the resurrected Christ, are they all apostles? No. So it had to be clear. God Yahweh wouldn't let this Jesus speak anything broader than you're going to testify about me. That's it. And never, you will never see in the book of Acts that Luke says Paul was appointed by Jesus Christ as an apostle of Jesus Christ. He's going to be a witness, but not an apostle, not a messenger, not somebody who's carrying quotes from Jesus. And also we know from the book, just all the epistles, there's not a single quote, not one quote of Jesus for a message from you to me, from the third heaven, speaking to Paul, telling him whatever, was messages that Paul's relating. So Paul, for example, everything in Galatians, find me one quote of Jesus in there. Talking to the third heaven, 0. Find for me in Romans any quote, one quote from Jesus. No. Find me any quote in Ephesians, one quote. Please find it. You won't find it. 1 Corinthians, find me one quote from Jesus. You won't find it. 2 Corinthians, find me any one quote from Jesus that was Paul talking to him in the third heaven. You won't find it. It's in 0, 0, 0, 0. Nothing. And I believe that was deliberately from God, that this Jesus can never be allowed to talk. But Paul tells you why in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 4 to 6. He says, it's illegal. It's illegal for me to tell you what Jesus talks to me in the third heaven. So he never gives us a message from Jesus in the third heaven. So everything you're reading is what I call pontification, making boastful claims and that I'm an apostle and all of the things. Anybody can do that. Joseph Smith can do it. And that's why it's an easy thing. If you just use Matthew 24, you can puncture and take all the air out of Paul. Same thing could be done with Joseph Smith. But the Protestant church today will not attack Joseph Smith's foundation, his admissibility as a prophet of Christ, because to do so would have to undermine that story I just showed you, that is his prophetic moment when his Christ, his Jesus and Yahweh come down and they're in his backyard, in the backwoods. And we won't attack it, because to do that is to attack Paul, because the same principle that would undermine Paul in Matthew 24 would undermine completely Joseph Smith as well. Now, I want to show you something that if you study Joseph Smith's work and try to figure out how he's going to shield himself from Matthew 24, he doesn't know that Pauline Christianity himself would never attack him using Matthew 24. So he's trying to find a way to do it, claim that, all Christianity is wrong, but I agree that the gospels are important or valid. But if I get inspired word from God and Jesus to change it, I'm more authoritative than anything you're reading today. That's what he's trying to do. But if you read carefully, it looks like he's not making any significant changes. I went through the whole thing and I went in detail that he moved, for example, Matthew 24, verse 6 to what he calls 1:23. That's all he does. He's not really doing much there. He does a similar thing with verse 7 here. He does it again. He just takes out this verse here completely, verse 14. Okay, one verse is missing. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached unto all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. That's it's just gone. It doesn't tell us why he would remove that. So in all this untouched, and again, this is a brand new verse. All things which have befallen them are only the beginning of the sorrows which shall come upon them. So why is he adding a new verse? It's not obvious. It's not obvious. He has another new verse here. 21 is new as well. Behold, these things I have spoken to concerning the Jews. Now that is new. And Jerusalem. And that's the clue. He's starting to make it sound like all of these events are for the Jews in the Jerusalem. And so the warnings of Christ are only for people who are Jewish people and only for people who live near Jerusalem. And I'm going to show you that now. Okay, here is the pertinent Joseph Smith version in Matthew 24, where one can see the materiality of the alterations. They're highlighted in purple. Okay, so let me just show you what I mean by highlighted in purple. See these words? Purple, purple, purple. And no purple there. So there's one purple here. So there's very little change. How many words are being changed? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 words. That's all it took to deflect it. That Palmyra, New York is off the radar of Jesus. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about something else. So let's read these words in context. I'll kind of read some of the surrounding words that are not really changed materially. Verse 6, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Verse 12. So I'm just showing you the material passages. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, then you shall stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. For then in those days shall be great tribulation on the Jews and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, such as was not before sent upon Israel of God since the beginning of their kingdom until the time no nor ever shall be sent against Israel. Verse 21. Behold, these things I have spoken unto you concerning the Jews, and again after the tribulation of these days which shall come upon Jerusalem, if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there believe him not. See what he's doing? He's trying to juxtapose these words so that you start thinking in your head, maybe this warning about a false Christ coming could only be in Jerusalem or to the Jewish people. Couldn't be possibly to me in Palmyra, New York. For in those days shall rise. Okay, so nothing else changes. So do you see? That's all he could do to try to change it so that maybe you'd see it differently than the way it reads now in the Greek text. And you wouldn't think that Jesus is talking about the Jews only or the city of Jerusalem in the warning. The warning was a universal warning because it was anybody who says they saw me anywhere is what he says. It starts off right there, at the very beginning. So it had nothing to do just with Jerusalem. It could be anything, anywhere, in any place, anytime. So this is what I commented about that. Thus, if Joseph Smith was so desperate to deflect Matthew 24 that he made material alterations to deflect its application to himself, we should, as Christians, followers of Jesus, be willing to throw it back at him. We need to say Smith's Jesus was deceiving Smith to remove the very criteria that would prove to Smith that his Jesus was false. But no Christian will presently say this because to do so will expose Paul to the same Berean examination, and this is not tolerable to anyone yet. So I'm going to say something pretty harsh, but I believe on Judgment Day, all the Protestant Christian leadership, the people who were in charge of the Bible, in charge of the ministries, that when they saw Joseph Smith arise and they were silent, and they did so because they knew to bring it up would hurt Paul's validity, these people are betrayers of Christ, because you cannot withhold the protection of the word. Jesus's words were meant to protect his name, his legacy, and who he was, and who could speak for him. And you knew, you scholars of the 1800s, you knew that Paul's Jesus could not pass Matthew 24, and you didn't raise it against Joseph Smith because you knew Paul couldn't satisfy it. Therefore, you were silent, and you abandoned the cause of Christ for the benefit of Paul. For nobody else and for no other reason, you were silent as lambs, and you misled us, you 1800, you Protestants of the 1800s. When this problem came up, you should have researched it immediately and told us. And that's what happens is when time goes by, people lose track of what was going on with Mormonism. But in those days, you would have known, the kid claimed to have met Jesus on the road, the woods behind his house. These are things that we didn't know, but you would have known. You would have had to investigate them and tested him. And so when you let it go this long without saying anything, you see what happens. It's you didn't do what you should have done immediately, and then it runs wild, and then we don't know why it didn't get stopped in the first place. And it should have been buried in its womb. In other words, it was completely defeatable easily if you just raise the same thing that would have destroyed Paul. So what? Your job is to protect Jesus Christ, not to protect Paul. But you see where you are. You've left behind one thing that mattered, the pearl of greatest price, the message of Jesus Christ, and he is now being in competition with their Jesus. And just so you know, they're completely Pauline sect. I have whole videos where they also reject God's law as well, the Torah and all that stuff. It doesn't have to apply. So their Jesus is just as apostate as Paul is, and they're like a sister religion to Paul, if you ask me. It's just now they have a new figurehead who can add stuff and change passages and be his own prophet if he can just change Matthew 24 and deflect the truth of what Matthew 24 originally said, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I hope this helps everyone see how grave the mistakes of our forefathers have been in not protecting us. All those scholars who first had to confront, Christian scholars who had to confront Mormonism, should have been investigating and carefully proving to us whether it was valid or not. And we're left thinking that it wasn't able to be disproved. But it was, if you just took the Matthew 24 and used it as it's intended by Jesus to block those who come in the name of Jesus, saying, I am Jesus, I'm here in a pillar of light, and believe that is the real Jesus. And that's what clearly Jesus gave this warning, so that we wouldn't accept that we would know our Lord had protected us from those people. And yet they didn't raise up any protection for us, because to do so would have been harmful to Paul's validity, and they made Paul more important than Christ. All right, God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.